kinds of stuff, but you won't see that. So we're going to go ahead and get started, everybody. If you want to take your seats, maybe shut the doors. My name is Michael Humphrey. I'm a rabbi at Rosh Pinah congregation. Rosh Pinah is about 38 years old. But many people don't know about us, but we're about 38 years old. My father started our congregation many, many years ago, many moons ago. I was raised, somebody asked me how I was raised. I was raised Messianic. There's no other way to be raised. This is how I was raised. I know nothing else other than being a Messianic. Now, obviously, I went to, church functions growing up as a kid because there wasn't much going on, in my part of the town for Messianics. But, I'm really the first generation. And my children are, second generation Messianic. They know nothing else. And why is it important I talk about this? Because we're going to talk about identity today. Identity in the Messianic community. And I want to talk about it from a very interesting perspective. I listened to Rabbi Adler earlier, and I was very moved by his presentation, and even got choked up at a moment because I felt like he was talking to me, and even though there was a crowd of people in there, and I felt a little bit like Guidon, and I felt like God was speaking to me, that he can take out the enemy's camp with even a rolling bagel. And that was very important for me to learn. But every message that we've heard throughout today has been very key and important to leading up, I think, to this message, and then ultimately the final one that comes from Rabbi Eric. But it's very important for us, both as Jewish people and Gentile people, to realize what our real identity is. What is our covenant? What is our identity as Messianics? Thank you. But we're going to talk about it very specifically. I'm going to take us through a process. Hopefully we can learn something. I loved what Rabbi Bortz was presenting. Love, Yeshua, very focused on Yeshua, the now. But unfortunately, I am going to go back into the past just a bit, just to understand. So rather than defining ourselves, and a lot of people do in a reactionary way, we sometimes react to church history, and we react to rabbinic tradition to define who we are. I'm going to examine the calling of Israel today. I'm going to look at Israel as the light to the nations. Pretty sure a couple of us spoke about that already today. I'm going to talk about the inclusion of Gentiles through grafting into the covenant. And I'm going to talk about the reconciliation between both, the one new man, which is kind of a buzzword right now. Grant Barry's got a book, Romans 9:1, that he shares with a lot of the evangelical world. Talking specifically about the one new man, and there's many things out there about the one new man, so it's kind of a buzzword, but we're going to talk about that. And then ultimately I want to present a vision for Jews and Gentiles together that form one restored Israel, and that they're called to carry a light to God into the world. So we're going to talk. It's going to be a little bit of a whirlwind, but stick with me for a moment. You go to the next slide. You can't even see it. Yeah, you don't even need it. I don't need it. It's really just for you, to be honest. After this, it just lists my scriptures, and you guys can see them, but we don't need it because I'm going to read everything. Yeah. It's actually a really nice presentation. I should share it with everybody. So there's this question that lingers quietly beneath the surface, I think, of all Messianic congregations and within each community. Yeah, I don't know if that helps. Okay, I have 2010 vision, and that looks like 2500. It's okay, no worries, no worries. But there's this question that's always lingering beneath our communities. It's not always spoken out loud, but It's felt in our conversations. It's in our liturgy. It's in, our underlying identity, and sometimes there's even tension around it. And it's a simple question, and it's very important for us. It's who are we really? A lot of Gentiles have this problem coming into this way of life. A lot of Jewish people have this problem coming into this way of life. Who are we really? And are we a community, specifically just talking about us for a moment in this room? Are we a community of Jews and Gentiles attempting to worship side by side, sharing space, but carrying separate destinies or callings? Many people believe that Jews and Gentiles, it's good to worship together, right? But you have a different calling than I have. I don't know if you've ever heard of the Paul. There's the Paul's ministries and Peter's ministry. Peter was to the Jew, Paul was to the Gentile, right? You hear this all the time. And there's clearly a delineation, there's a separation. And so it becomes, are we sharing space in different destinies? That's a question that lingers. Are we an entirely new phenomenon? Is Messianic Judaism new in the earth? Is it some unexpected spiritual experiment that was birthed out of some spiritual collision that reshaped religion over time? You can obviously think that we could potentially just be something brand new. Or perhaps we're returning to something far more ancient than we actually realize. Something that's not rooted in the modern religious movements, but in the covenant itself. Rather than looking at, are we part of the church, or are we part of Judaism? We're part of a covenant. It's an ancient covenant. And this is something that I think is so important for we as a community to start to reconcile a bit. Because there's so many Gentiles that are worried about whether or not, how many Gentiles do you know in a congregation, Messianic community? They're all taking blood tests. Stop. Stop. For what? It doesn't matter. We're part of something. We're part of something. And by the end of this teaching, I hope you feel like you're really part of something. And so I don't believe the answer is found in reacting to the evolution of church history or the past 1,700 years. It's church history from the 2nd, 3rd, 4th centuries. Just read it. John Chrysostom, Eusebius. Look, read the history of the church, the establishment of the church, and what it was based on. It was based on escaping from Judaism, eliminating Judaism from its practice. But guess what? Judaism was doing the same thing. I don't know if you know, there's a book called Toldot Yeshu. I don't know how many of you know this book, Toldot Yeshu, but Toldot Yeshu says that Peter and Paul were Jewish plants put into the Christian world to cause these Christians to be so much different from the Jewish people. Jewish agents, Jewish spies on behalf of Judaism to confuse the nations that Jesus was a sorcerer. You know this book? You know this is common in Orthodox Judaism. This is what goes on. So this is what happens 70 to 90 after the destruction of the temple. What's happening 70 to 90 CE? We have Yavne. We have the creation of the Talmud and the Mishnah coming out of this period of time when the rabbis were coming to figure out what in the world are we? Who are we? What's our identity? We've lost the central purpose of our people. 200 plus commandments annulled right there through the destruction of the temple. 613 commands mitzvot found in the Torah, 200 plus commandments no longer able to be practiced. Who are we? I don't know. We got to get the rabbis together. We got to figure it out. And so 70 to 90 AD, they're not worried necessarily about Christians. They're worried about themselves. They're dealing with a tumult of problems, destruction of the temple, of the people. They're trying to figure themselves out. Meanwhile, you've got a bunch of rogue minim, according to the Orthodox, which is minim. What does it mean? It means these heretics running around trying to figure out their identity. The people who believe in Yeshua. Yeshua was cherem. Yeshua was not accepted in Judaism. And so he was ousted, and so they're trying to figure out their identity. You got two streams trying to figure this out at the same time. Look at socioeconomically, look what was going on. Sociopolitically, it's a disaster during this time. So everybody's trying to figure out who they are. It's not found, our identity is not found in reacting to the evolution of these moments in history. The establishment of the church, the establishment of Judaism. When attempting to discover our communal identity, we can't find it fighting against the theology in the church or even the Jewish tradition of Judaism. This approach is ultimately proven to be unsuccessful. Reacting to the past produces a cause. But when it will never produce your identity. It's really awesome to join a cause. I mean, how many of you, that have bluer hair, in the 70s, you were part of a movement. I forget who told me earlier. He came up, I think it was you, Robert, right? Sorry, your name is right here. Yeah. Robert told me you came out of the Jesus movement, did you not? That was a whole movement. There was a thing happening at Woodstock. I mean, that was a cause, but most of those people, they left out of that. They're no longer part of that. They came together and they had something, and it was interesting, and it was a cause. Even Messianic Judaism, for all intents and purposes. In the 60s, we talked today about Chernoff and all the others that started this thing. Well, it was a cause then. It was a cause, but let me tell you something. Har Sinai was not the destination. It was a place along the journey. Har Sinai is not the destination. We're always trying to turn situations into a Har Sinai moment. We're in a journey. We're on our way somewhere, and there's stops along the way, and the cause cannot be the reason for our identity. So if who we are is primarily shaped by what we resist, the church, traditional Judaism, then our identity is dependent upon the very thing that we aim to reject. It's dependent upon it. This is not what I call covenant identity. This is what I call reactionary identity. Your identity becomes reactionary. I'm not like the church. I'm not like them. I keep the Shabbat. I keep the Moedim. I eat biblical kosher. And the rabbis say, what is biblical kosher? And then you defend yourself against the rabbis. Well, biblical kosher is what matters. Right? Kashrut didn't exist the way it does today then. But there's a point of origin. And we have to understand where that point of origin is. If you take yourself 1 degree away from the point of origin, right now, I'm at the point of origin. We take 1 degree off. How many years later until we're miles apart? How many years later? We are so many miles apart from the point of origin where the covenant was established with the people of God, with Israel, and not only with Israel, with the nations, that we're so confused about who we are. We're trying to find our identity in what we resist. Not in the covenant that we're meant to find the identity in. So it's important for us to embody who we were made to be. This is something that Rabbi Adler said today. And it choked me up even listening to him, because the way he put it together, he's a very good teacher. I don't know if you missed it, but you should probably look him up, because he was a good teacher. And he wrote a Bible. Yeah, I didn't know that. And I know that now. I downloaded it. But think about this. You're supposed to be who you were made to be. Know that your identity is not formed by finding something to fight against or defined by our disagreement. How many congregations do you go to? I probably say it and I'm jumping ahead, but no one likes a know-it-all. You know, Messianic Jews are know-it-alls. Messianic Gentiles are even more know-it-alls. Nobody likes that. Like, that's not good. And what the problem is, what happens is we don't look at ourselves to help ourselves. We're always looking out and trying to tell everybody what they're doing wrong. Well, you didn't do this right, you're not doing this right. If you would read the original this, if you read the original Hebrew, and half the people who say, if you read the original Hebrew, can't read the Hebrew. It's a problem. In our communities, we have to fix it. Our identity is formed by discovering the promise that called us in the first place. Why were you called? Why were you called? We're not shaped in opposition to someone else's belief system. You know, there's so much going on in the church today. I don't know if you guys know, this NAR movement is a nightmare. I mean, it's a nightmare. I'm not even going to get into New Apostolic Reformation. It's a lot of stuff going on. But even you've got the Hebrew Roots movement that's going on. You've got all this stuff. You know, Messianic Judaism had such an opportunity to help lead the way. And we still do, by the way. We need to work on our kids. Good people have to have more kids. That's why you can see my 5 ducklings walking around here with us. We need to really, truly focus on the identity of what we are so we can help the world, help them understand the calling that we have, the identity as a people of God, one Israel. We're shaped in response to God's covenant, and in the end, our messianic identity, whether you're born Jewish or Gentile, is not built on protest. It's built on God's promises. That's the key. If the first thing you hear out of someone's mouth is, are you a Jew or a Gentile? You got a problem. Your identity is jacked up. It's not about Jew or Gentile. Are you in the covenant? Are you in the promises of God? And what are you doing about it? Are you doing what Rabbi Borsch just stood up here and told you to do? Go out into all the world and minister that gospel? Or is that what you're doing? Are you doing what Rabbi Euler said in taking the Basora Tovah? Basarot Tovot? Plural. Are we doing those things? Are we taking that? And if we are, then we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. But if we're caught up in the stuff that's confusing this community's identity, we need to fix it. So we have to ascertain the answers in the covenant that preceded all religious debates. It preceded theological understandings because God's covenant predates any and all division between man. Tanakh tells us a single unfolding story that begins with a calling and expands through the promise, and it culminates in the life of Mashiach Yeshua. In the Tanakh, we find the story about our God who binds himself to a people for the sake of reconciling the word to him, and a story about selecting a people that will ultimately illuminate the world with the light of his presence because he loves his creation. So when we return to covenant living, the narrative becomes clear. We realize that we're not just fragments of theological traditions trying to negotiate with unity. Rather, we're participants in a unified story that has always been moving toward reconciliation with each other and, more importantly, with God. From Gan Eden to today, from Yerushalayim to Yehuda to Shomron to the rest of the world. Reconciliation is coming. Sorry, I lost my position. There it is. So let's understand that the covenant doesn't erase our distinctions. Get that. The covenant doesn't erase distinctions. It weaves them together into God's perfect purpose. And when we embrace the covenant story, we discover something extraordinary. That we are not two peoples, Jews and Gentiles, struggling to coexist. We're one Israel, called to carry one light into the world. So let's talk about that. I'm going to break that down. I'm going to go into the Jewish calling. Help you understand that for a moment, which we all should know it. I'm going to go into the Gentile space, help us understand that. I'm going to talk about a one new man, help us understand that. Then I'm going to go real quick and talk about the prophetic of brotherhood, the prophecy around it, and then we're going to close it up. So all that being said, let's take a closer look at the calling of the Jewish people specifically. Let's try to understand who we are as Messianic people. In order to accomplish it, we have to begin at the story's origin, not in the later writings of the New Testament. You understand that, right? This story is not founded in the New Testament. At the original calling of Israel itself, before there was a movement, before there were theological debates, before there were categories of Jew and Gentile believers in Mashiach, the fact that we still even deal with the distinctions like that is interesting to me, but let's keep going. There was a covenant, and at the heart of that covenant was a particular and communal calling. So Yeshayahu, God used Yeshayahu. Everybody knows who that is? Yeshayahu? Isaiah. God used Isaiah to provide Israel what they're calling in both 42:6 and 49:6. So I'll read those two. I, the Lord, have called you in righteousness. I will take you by the hand and keep you. I will give you as a covenant for the people, a light for the nations. And again, let's look at 49:6. It is too small a thing that you should be my servant to raise up the tribes of Yaakov and to bring back the preserved of Israel. I will make you as a light for the nations, that my salvation may reach to the ends of the earth. So let's home in on the scope of this calling. It's not enough, the Lord says, for Israel to be concerned with only with its own restoration. It is too small a thing for the covenant people to look inward alone. The vision of God is always stretched beyond the tribal boundaries of Israel. This means Israel was not chosen to just survive or preserve her own legacy. She was chosen to shine. And God's election of Abraham was never just for the purpose of privilege. He and his offspring were selected for a spiritual purpose. This isn't just for, privilege or just because he was just a good guy. It was because he was a good guy that he selected him to do this grand mission of being light to the world, to the nations. And it was too small a thing for them to focus on themselves. Go to Israel today. I was just there in May. I don't know if you know who Yitzhak Ginsburg is, but he's one of the most famous rabbis he leads the Gematria world in Chabad Lubavitch Judaism. I spent 3 hours in his home, in his kitchen with him, talking about reconciliation between Jews and the Gentiles. He wants to get his message out. He wants to bring the Christians in because he believes that the Christians are Esav and the Jews are Yaakov. And in order for the Mashiach to come, Yaakov and Esav have to kiss. You remember that story? Chabad Lubavitch Judaism believes without reconciliation between the Jews and the Christians, Mashiach can never return. They believe it. I'm not saying that we got anywhere, because we didn't. But I can tell you right now that Judaism, especially in Israel, especially Lubavitch, especially Orthodox Judaism, is inward focused, not outward. We have to be outward focused. It's too small of a thing. This means that Israel's not chosen to survive, they have to shine. Election to perform a spiritual function on earth. And ultimately the covenant with Abraham, the redemption from Mitzrayim, the giving of the Torah, all of it was moving toward a singular mission, that through Israel, the knowledge, the da'at of one true God would reach the ends of the world. And so this mission was made unmistakably clear at Har Sinai. There in the shadow and the fire and the thunder and the shaking earth, the Lord says in Shemot chapter 19:6, he says, "You shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation." So this calling was clearly not a casual calling. This was not God talking to Moshe in passing. Why? Because a priest doesn't exist for himself. You understand that a priest, if that's what your calling is, and you're part of Israel, you don't exist for yourself. A priest is required to mediate, to carry the burdens of others, to stand in the gap between heaven and earth, to represent God to the people and the people before God. The priest had to embody holiness as a humble servant, not as an isolationist. And so to be called a kingdom of priests means that the entire nation was entrusted with a mediating role in the earth. And Israel's election was to perform a mission. Their obedience to the Torah was never intended to create distance from the nations, but rather to visibly demonstrate the wisdom and righteousness of God before them. This is why Moshe told the people the nations would see their statutes and say, what, in Devarim 4:6, surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people. Even in the rabbinic text, we see that Rashi reflects on Yeshayahu's vision. And we all know it as the Or LaGoyim, but he's reflecting on this, and he says, and he understood that this Or, this light, was to be represented through the living actions of the people, and that it was not just a mystical abstraction, but it was the Torah lived visibly and righteousness embodied in their daily lives. They had to be the representation. And when Israel would live faithfully to this, according to God's Torah, all the nations of the earth would be drawn to God. And they're not drawn by force, they're not drawn by conquest. One of the rabbis said that today. I thought it was beautiful. We're not going to win from force. We're going to win because we're a light, because of holiness. And that's the beauty of it. So even the Talmud preserves this sense of priestly responsibility. We look at Sukkah 59b. The sages teach that the 70 bulls that were offered at the festival of Sukkot correspond specifically to the 70 nations of the world. So Israel, in the midst of its rejoicing, its water libations during Sukkot and other festivities, they would intercede for humanity. They would carry the world before God in an outward-facing manner. But you know what's crazy about that? The most amazing thing is that they would carry the world without the world even knowing that it was being carried. What's the point of bringing an offering to God on Sukkot for the nations, and the nations don't know you're doing it? They played their little role. This is the calling of the Jewish people, to be priests, to be light. And this calling doesn't disappear or become canceled or get replaced in a post-resurrection period. It's deepened and it's intensified through the belief in Yeshua. Yeshua stood on a hill in Galilee and he said, "You are the light of the world. A city on a hill cannot be hidden." Rob Borsch said that today. You are the light of the world. You can't hide, you can't put yourself under a basket. He wasn't inventing this idea. Yeshua didn't invent this. This is what's crazy. Number one, he did invent it because he's, Yeshua, and he's the Word made flesh. But arguably, at this time, he didn't reinvent this idea. It wasn't something new. It wasn't a new sermon. It was a teaching it was a teaching, the words given to Yeshayahu, and he was reaffirming the covenant of Har Sinai with this. He was speaking to Jewish disciples and reminding them of their ancestral vocation, that the light had always been Israel's calling, and now in him, that calling was to be clarified and further empowered. Yeshua doesn't create the light. He is the light. And he extends that same light himself to the world through his disciples he's in covenant with through Abraham. So let's understand the mission still begins in Israel. I think all of us realize that. I hope we all do. Just as the prophets foresaw, it doesn't end there. Like I said before, from Jerusalem to Yehuda to Shomron, all the way to the ends of the earth, this is how the light should move. And the Jewish calling remains that it has always been to live in covenant faithfulness so visibly, so authentically that the nations encounter the God of Israel through that witness. And so let me transition now to this question. Because if the sons of Israel are called to be the lights of the world, the honest question that follows it naturally is, what of the nations? What of the Gentiles? This question of Acts, what do we do with these joy and all these Gentiles that are coming to the faith? What do we do with them? I remember years ago I was a part of something, and that question came up, and I thought to myself, is this seriously a question that already was dealt with in Acts? Like, why are we asking it in this environment? The craziest thing I've ever heard, but it is. So if the covenant begins with Abraham and it flows through Yitzchak and Yaakov, where do the peoples of the earth stand? Now listen close. Are they just perpetual outsiders looking in? Are they observers of a story that's not truly theirs? The Torah itself anticipates this question long before it's ever raised in the apostolic writings. And nestled within the holiness code of Vayikra, we find a command that would have sounded absolutely revolutionary in the ancient world. Vayikra 19:34. The stranger, the ger who dwells among you, shall be to you as one born among you. And you shall love him as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Mitzrayim. So in a world that was defined by boundaries, rigid hierarchies, this instruction stands out with significant clarity, that the Torah does not permit the ger to remain a perpetual second-class resident. He's not to simply be tolerated. God expects him or her to be loved, not segregated into a special corner of the camp, but rather treated, very importantly, in quotes, as one born among you. So this phrase carries enormous significance for the people of the nations. God isn't erasing Israel's identity, by no means. He's elevating the foreigner. Israel's identity remains. But then something beautiful happens. God elevates the foreigner into shared dignity with the covenant community. And in order to express this, God uses the memory of Mitzrayim as the moral foundation for Israel's compassion on the nations. He reminds them that because they were once strangers, because Israel was strangers, they must understand the heart of the stranger and allow their memories to produce mercy upon the world, embracing them and not retreating into isolation. And so even the prophets don't shrink from this vision. They expand upon it even more. Yeshayahu, the very same prophet who defines Israel's calling, also declares this about the nations. In 56:7, my house shall be called a house of prayer for whom? All nations. So this isn't a late theological development designed as a correction in the Brit Chadashah regarding the inclusion of the nations. The nations have always been in the foresight of God. He's using Israel as the tool to help bring the nations in. It's God's goal and his desire to bring all of his creation underneath the shadow of his wings. Not just one nation. It's too small a thing. It's too light of a thing. He's bringing all of his people, all of his creation, and he loves them. So this isn't something that was being fixed in the Brit Chadashah. It's woven into Israel's scriptures from the very beginning. And Yeshayahu envisions that the foreigner join themselves to the Lord, who love his name and hold fast to his covenant. Let's go to Zechariah. Zechariah adds an image in 8:23. He says, in those days, 10 men, Rabbi Holbrook used this in his message, 10 men from the nations of every language shall take hold of the robe of a Jew, saying, let us go with you, for we have heard that God is with you. Notice the order here. Listen to the order. The nations do not replace the Jew. They do not seize the covenant by force, as you see happening in the 3rd and 4th centuries. They do not redefine Israel's identity. They take hold of the garment of a Jew and say, let us go with you. The movement here is the development of a relationship. It's an invitation that reflects an alignment with Israel's covenant rather than covenantal displacement of Israel. Centuries later, after the writings of the prophets, Rabbi Shaul, Rabbi Paul, I've heard both today, so I usually say Rabbi Shaul, but I'll say those two. He articulates this mystery, and he uses very careful language. When he's talking in Ephesus, chapter 2, verse 11 through 13, he says, therefore remember that formerly you who are Gentiles by birth, called uncircumcised by those who call themselves the circumcision, which is done in the body by human hands. Remember that at that time you were separate from Mashiach, excluded from citizenship in Israel, and foreigners to the covenants of the promise, without hope and without God in the world. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that they were missing, okay? But now, in Mashiach Yeshua, you who once were far away have been brought near by the blood of Mashiach. So Rav Shaul is describing the creation of he's not describing the creation of a new detached entity called the church. He's not describing something brand new that's completely separate from Israel. He's not describing the church or a new religious system called Christianity. He didn't create that there. He speaks of nearness to the commonwealth of Israel. That's not Christianity, as people would say, that Paul created a new tract. He speaks of access to the covenants of promise. For the ger, for the stranger, they have access. He speaks of transformation of relationships with creation of God through reconciliation. And he chooses in Romans chapter 11 a metaphor. 17 through 18, he says, if some of the branches were broken off, and you, although a wild olive shoot, were grafted in among the others, and now share in the nourishing root of the olive tree, don't be arrogant toward the branches. He's not talking about two trees. He's talking about one tree. He's not talking about replacement. He's not saying removal. He's talking about grafting. And what is grafting? It's organic. It's agriculture. A wild branch can be joined to a cultivated rootstock so that their living tissues will fuse together, and when the graft takes, the vascular system connects and the life of the root begins to nourish the branch. I've never tried it. I'm very inclined to after going through this. But it's important to know that the branch does not change its genetic identity, nor does the cultivated tree cease to be what it is. Understand this. If I take a granny apple tree, break off a branch from a granny apple tree, and I go and I cut at a 45, and I trim that back, I pull back that bark, and I stick that granny apple tree into a crab apple tree in my backyard. The most amazing thing is that granny apple tree, once it connects to that crab apple tree, the rootstock will flow into it, and the fruit on that rootstock, on that granny apple tree, will be much larger and voluminous than the fruit on the original tree. I didn't know that until I read about it. But guess what? That granny apple tree will never produce a crab apple. It'll always be a granny apple tree. And the original tree that produces crab apples will always be a crab apple tree. This tree doesn't produce what this tree produces, but it still is cared for, and it blows up for all intents and purposes. It actually has more fruit on it than the original tree has on it. Well, doesn't that make sense, Paul? That the Gentile nations, I mean, anyone that's got half a mind understands that there's 15 million Jews in the world and there's 8 billion people. 8 billion people and 15 million Jews. Do you honestly think that the grafted in portion of that tree is not going to flourish bigger than the original tree? Of course it is. It's statistics. Take a basic high school math class. It's not eliminating anybody. It's making a point that we have an opportunity. This small Gidon has an opportunity to go out into the world and turn 300 into 5 million, and 5 million into 1 billion, and 1 billion into 2 billion. This is the beautiful part of this message. So in this passage, the nations, they're warned. They say, don't boast or forget the root that sustains you, because it has to make them humble, which is essential to covenant identity. And so the covenant is not reduced to bloodline. That's what's even wilder. It's nothing to do with your bloodline. Don't ask another person if their blood is Jewish. Don't do it. If it is, Baruch Hashem. But if your blood's not, Baruch Hashem, the fact that you're here. Do you understand that? Jewish identity doesn't evaporate into vague spiritual sameness because Gentiles are included. Something far more significant happens. The covenant family grows. The stranger is no longer a stranger. The one who was far off is now brought near. So allow me to use an analogy of Israel, something that all of us will understand this dynamic of grafting. Through looking at our American experience. How many of us are American citizens? How many of us are proud American citizens? How many love the American flag? I love it. Every time I leave the country and come home, man, I see the flag and it's like, oh, I feel better. Do you understand that we're one nation under God? Well, let's look at the United States. The United States is a melting pot. It's a nation shaped by people who came from every corner of the earth, and when immigrants arrive and pursue citizenship, they don't cease to be Italian, Serbian, Chinese, African, Hispanic, Irish. Their heritage is their heritage. Their history remains. Their family stories remain. Their cultural memories remain. Yet when they take the oath of citizenship, something larger binds them together. They become Americans. Their identities are not erased. They're joined to a greater national identity. We speak of Italian Americans, Chinese Americans, African Americans. They're all distinct in their own heritage, but they remain unified in citizenship, and we rally around one flag, and we honor one constitution, and we share one national allegiance while remembering where we came from. We all do that. We understand the story of Israel. We understand the Jew and the Gentile coming together as one. We understand it because we're Americans. My grandparents were immigrants. How many of yours were? My grandparents came here. My wife's mom came here from Serbia. My wife's a first generation, but you talk to her and she's an American. We're Americans. Do you not understand? This is the story of Israel. This is what we are. This is what the Brit Chadashah was trying to tell you. This is what Paul was doing. He was saying the same thing. And the founding fathers, for whatever reason, they understood it and got it to work. How they got it to work is they took out the religion. They got it to work because it's a functioning thing. But there's something far deeper and holier in the way that reflects the mystery of the covenant in Mashiach. Jewish believers don't stop being Jewish. The covenant with Abraham is not dissolved. The promises of the Torah, the prophetic calling, all remain living realities. And the nations who are brought near, they don't necessarily become ethnic Jews. They become full participants and citizens in a covenantal household of our God. Their earthly heritage remains, but their primary allegiance is now to the God of Israel and his Mashiach. What changes is their citizenship. And Rav Shaul says, those who were once alienated from the commonwealth of Israel are now brought near. Our Messianic Jewish communities are not a proxy for assimilation. Our communities are absolute melting pots. And not melting pots to the point where it's like a fondue where you put all kinds of different cheeses and it melts together and you don't tell the difference. I mean, you can tell the difference in our communities. You can see the difference, the different cultural backgrounds. I mean, at Oneg, you can taste the difference. We're all different, and it's okay. Assimilation is not the key here. We're an ensign for the world to look upon for guidance, specific to the incorporation of many people becoming one. We are the living expression of God's tent being stretched. That one's for Michael. He said something to me earlier. But the covenant family is expanding. While its roots remain unchanged and its branches multiply and reach farther, we're the community where the stranger finds home and the foreigner finds belonging, where the one who was far off now stands within the household of faith, not as a guest, but as mishpachah. That is in the miracle of reconciliation and the beauty of one Israel under one Mashiach. So in the Mashiach, the dividing wall of hostility is removed, not so the distinctions disappear, but so that enmity does. So let's transition to the one new man quickly. What does it mean to be co-heirs? How many of you know that you're co-heirs with each other, right? Whenever the subject of unity arises, especially within the Messianic communities, there's an unspoken fear that often surfaces. This is important. If you're Jewish, listen close. If you're Gentile, listen close. What is the fear that comes up when you talk about unity? It's the fear of losing something essential. For the Jewish believer, more often than not, it's the fear that unity means dilution. Assimilating into something indistinct from who we are, or who our parents are, or who our grandparents were. Like all of a sudden you're going to lose the fact because you believe in Yeshua and you got all these Gentiles around you. Your family is not going to look at you like you're Jewish anymore. But if you hang out with a lot of Jewish people that have a lot of Jewish last names, they're going to think, oh, he's Jewish, he's got a little mashugana on the head. So dilution is a big problem. Are we diluting? I remember hearing years ago, I was talking to a Messianic leader who is Jewish, and he said, I don't tell my mom that Gentiles come to our congregation because she'd write me off. You know, it's like all of a sudden your history, your grandparents who died in the Holocaust are no longer your grandparents. Well, that's ridiculous. They're still your grandparents. They're no longer your grandparents in the minds of somebody. It doesn't make them not your grandparents. And who cares what those people think, because they're Meshuvah. For the Gentile believers, it may be the fear of exclusion, never quite belonging, never fully at home. You know, you have a lot of Gentiles that go into Messianic communities, they don't feel fully at home. They don't really feel like they belong. I get phone calls every single week. I'm a Gentile, I go to a church, but I've been researching, and I really think Messianic Judaism is the way to go, okay? I think that's beautiful, that's great, and that's how it starts, right? And typically, it's got like a 90%, like, they're not going to show up rate, okay? But regardless, you do what you can to help them to feel adequate, and, you know, people come, and they still feel, you know, not really at home. How is it that a church can invite someone to come to service and a bunch of, you know, distinctiveness, sameness? I mean, if you ever go to like a evangelical church, they're all the same. They walk the same, talk the same, wear the same gear, have the same tattoos, sing the same songs. They have all the sameness in the world, and these people can make the world feel connected. But we can't make the people outside feel connected. And then we say, well, they're Gentile. They're not Jewish, so they don't get it. But you know how many Jews don't feel connected to Messianic Judaism? They think about their history growing up and they say, it's too much like the synagogue. I don't want nothing to do with that. It's the same thing. We've got something going on that we've got to really kind of hone in on and fix. The scriptures offer something regarding what it feels like to negotiate over our identity. Rav Shaul says, for he himself, Ephesians, for he himself is our peace, who has made us both one, has broken down in his flesh the dividing wall of hostility by abolishing the law of commandments expressed in ordinances, that he might create in himself one new man in place of the two, so making peace. Peace is not achieved by erasing our differences. It's achieved by reconciling them. The phrase one new man doesn't mean that Jewish distinctiveness disappears, that the nations are flattened into sameness. Rav Shaul's not describing cultural amnesia. He's describing a covenant reconciliation. Something new is formed, but it's formed from two existing realities brought into harmony. The Greek word he's using there for new carries the sense of renewed in quality, not newly invented in substance. Not creating a new thing. He's creating, he's giving you a new sense of quality. I just recently had an emergency surgery on my appendix a couple weeks back. And And I felt generally unwell. You know, I kind of look unwell. I mean, but I generally felt unwell in my gut, and I knew something was wrong. But I also felt it before that for a year in my stomach. I didn't realize that I also had a hernia. So I got a twofer. They went in there, they fixed that, and they also fixed my hernia. Well, the beautiful part of that is I got a tune-up. I feel really good. I told my wife, my stomach feels good. I feel put together. I'm not in pain. I don't feel really unwell. So that nothing was changed really. It was just kind of made new in quality, right? And I feel good. But centuries before Rav Shaul ever penned the words that he wrote about this one new man, the prophet Ezekiel saw the vision in symbolic form. This is the scriptures in 37:19. It talks about the two sticks, Joseph and Ephraim, the tribes associated with him. And so I'm not going to read it, but Ephraim represented the northern tribes, which were often linked to, symbolically, the Gentile nations due to the dispersion. And Yehuda represented the southern kingdom, obviously, and they were supposed to be brought back together as one people under the Mashiach. And this reunification of Israel's divided tribes is understood as a foreshadowing of the greater ingathering of the people, Jew and Gentile, under the reign of Mashiach. So what it's emphasizing is the restoration of Israel. There were two histories here. There were two different dispersions, but there was one hand. The prophet is not describing the creation of two Israels. He's announcing the restoration of one Israel. Thus, the fracture caused by exile, division, and rebellion would not define Israel's future, but God himself would hold the pieces and bring them together. And it's important for us to understand that Yeshua didn't create competing covenant communities. We have it right now. We have competing covenant communities in the world. I mean, you can't have an Arab Shabbat service at your house and not talk about the Sunday goers. How do they do that? How do they keep this? How do you keep the pagan feasts? I mean, it's like nonstop. We're the know-it-alls. We are. And there's something to it because it's not wrong. It's not wrong. But the approach is. The approach is off. We're not making a bigger impact. We're to the point that, to be honest with you, the Jewish people have to be the light to the nations, and the nations have to grasp their hymn. And I believe that with my whole heart. But the nations are grasping the hymn of themselves, saying, "Show me your way, you have God." Well, something's wrong. The Jewish believer carries a significant number of covenant memories because of the generations that shape the Torah, shaped by the Torah, prophetic expectation, ancestral suffering, the divine preservation. There's a weight of continuity that cannot and should not be erased. Jewish identity within Mashiach is not an obstacle to the unity that we seek. It's essential to our unity. On the flip side, the Gentile believer carries something equally profound: the testimony of grafting, the humility of being brought near, the hunger for God and his covenant that says, "Let us go with you, for we have heard that God is with you." There's a beauty in the adoption, a gratitude that flows from once being far off and now being welcomed into covenant life. Together, something's revealed that neither could display alone. The Jewish calling demonstrates to the world the faithfulness of covenant, revealing how God keeps his promises across the centuries. And through exile and return, the grafted in nations demonstrate the faithfulness of mercy. So we have faithfulness of covenant with the Jewish people and faithfulness of mercy with the Gentile nations, where God's grace reached beyond bloodline, beyond geography, and beyond history, so that the covenant faithfulness and covenant mercy meet in Yeshua. And when they do, the result within the community is never confusion. It's the revelation of a beautiful priesthood that serves the world for God. The book of Revelation declares it to us. To all of those who have been redeemed by the Lamb, Revelation 1:6 says, "He has made us a kingdom of priests and priests to our God." This is literally Har Sinai. The same language used in Shemot 19. The same priestly mission given to Israel is now seen in its enlarged expression within the body of the community of Yeshua through John's revelation. The calling remains the same. We're to mediate the knowledge of God to the world, to embody His holiness found within the Torah, and to carry light. The one new man is not just a melting pot where identities dissolve into insignificance. It's a living testimony that peace is possible without removal and that unity can exist without domination. The covenant can expand without collapsing. So what does this mean for all of us? And what does it mean for our Messianic community? If all of this is true, if Mashiach has made peace, if the olive tree remains one, if the two sticks are held in one hand, then this is not just theology. It's identity for living. So if we're to be one Israel in Mashiach, then certain things have to fall away. And I've identified 4 that both the Jew and grafted and Gentile must reflect on. First, and I say grafted in Gentile because not all Gentiles are in the covenant. You can't just say Gentile. So first, there can be no superiority. Second, there can be no removal, no erasure. Third, there can be no replacement. And fourth, there can be no second-class citizenship. These 4 characteristics that Hasatan uses to define us all lead to confusing our calling. So first, let's look at superiority. Yeah, you're way off, bud. We're at like the last slide almost. Second to last slide. Up one. That's fine. Just stay there. First, let's look at superiority quickly because I'm running out of time. It has no place in the covenant that's built upon mercy. Hopefully, we all know that. The Jewish believer cannot boast as though election were self-earned. The story of Israel is a story of divine grace. You didn't earn anything to be Jewish, FYI. You were born that way. So anyone who acts like they earned it, you're in the wrong boat. Stop using Genesis 12 as your scripture to go into churches and take their money. It's my opinion. We're together. We're one. If we bless each other, Baruch Hashem. That's what we're called to do because we're one community. Now, conversely, I'm going to beat the Jew up, I'm going to beat the Gentile up. The grafted in believer can't boast as though inclusion were an achievement. Adoption was a gift, not an accomplishment. You accomplished nothing. It was grace. So stop boasting, right? Superiority has to die. Pride in our communities fractures what Mashiach has reconciled. Erasure removal has no place in our communities. Jewish identity is not dissolved in the Mashiach. This happens when we as Jewish people or whoever's out there that's Jewish, this happens when you feel that your family is going to eliminate you from their communities. We have to get rid of that in our own psyche, in our own minds, in our own spirits. The covenants, the promises, the patriarchs, the Torah, these are not relics of a former dispensation. They are living realities that continue to define God's redemptive work in history. So to follow Yeshua as a Jew is not to become less Jewish, but to walk in the fullness of Israel's hope. Third, there is no replacement. The nations do not displace Israel. Israel's not sidelined in favor of the nations. The covenant story is not rewritten. It is fulfilled. Replacement theology breaks the continuity of God's covenant story, but Mashiach restores it to its intended wholeness. And finally, there's no second-class citizenship. The grafted-in believer is not a spiritual immigrant, perpetually standing at the edge of the camp, asking, "Can I please come in? Can I have a bite of onek? Am I welcome to your onek table?" That's got to stop. What did Rav Shaul say? That the Gentiles are fellow heirs, member of the same body, partakers of the same promise in Mashiach Yeshua? That's Ephesians 3:6. Fellow heirs, not tolerated guests. Fellow heirs. Members of the same body, not parallel communities. That's our Jewish side. This is our Christian side, or Gentile side. One body, animated by one spirit, partakers of the same promise. They're not just observing it. They're not just beneficiaries of something that belongs to someone else. They're partakers that share in the very covenant promises given to Israel, which are now revealed in Yeshua as Mashiach. All that being said, let us understand that the Jewish calling remains what it has always been, to be a light, to embody Torah faithfulness, covenant fidelity, in a way that testifies to the unchanging character of God. Jewish believers in Yeshua carry the sacred responsibility of continuity through Israel. The world will see that God has not abandoned his promises to Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and through them the prophetic story remains anchored in history. And likewise, the grafted in nations, you're called not to redefine the covenant, but to join yourself to it. Adoption doesn't mean authorship. The wild branch doesn't get to redesign the tree. It receives nourishment from the rootstock. There's an innate humility in that posture, and there's strength in it as well. The nations bring hunger and gratitude and zeal and testimony of being brought near. They join themselves to the God of Israel and his Mashiach, not to construct something new, but to participate in something that's very ancient and very alive. So together, we embody the mystery Rav Shaul spoke of, a mystery hidden for generations, but now revealed, that the nations are not outsiders to God's redemptive plan. There are participants within it. And when we live this reality with humility and conviction, the world won't see fragmentation. It'll see reconciliation. It'll see the wisdom of God displayed in a people who've every historical reason to remain divided, yet stand united in covenantal love. I got too much to go. I'm out of time. It's 4:15. I'm going to listen to Rob Eric. He yelled at all of us. But I've got a couple of pages that I didn't get through, but I will read the conclusion here just to kind of wrap it up. The world doesn't need a fractured messianic movement arguing over our identity. It doesn't need competing narratives or internal suspicion. It doesn't need insecurity masked as theology. What the world needs is a united, humble, covenant-rooted people who reflect the glory of God of Israel. The Jewish calling is not canceled. God's promises have not expired. The covenants remain, and likewise the nations are not second class, because adoption is not inferiority and grafting is not marginalization. It is literally the mercy of God. It is rachamim. Mashiach has made peace, not a fragile truce held together by tension, but true reconciliation rooted in covenant faithfulness. We're not two communities negotiating for space within the same sanctuary. We are one Mashiach, learning to walk together and honor one another's call. So let us lay down our pride to carry the light as one people. And when Jewish believers walk confidently in their covenant calling, while grafted in believers walk humbly in covenant gratitude, the light increases. And when the light increases, the world cannot help but notice. And the nations will once again say, as the prophet foresaw, "Let us go with you, for we have heard that God is with you." This is our calling, to be one Israel, to be one in Mashiach, and represent ourselves as one light to the nations. Amen. Amen.
You can speak to that topic.